Okay, good morning. Yeah. Okay, good morning. This might become a series, it might not become a series. I'm not really sure yet, but we ended off before midwinter. We were discussing some of the Charamas of Rabbeinu Gershom, some of like the Rabbeinu Gershom Takanas. I'm thinking about maybe going into a little more detail into Rabbeinu Gershom's Takanas. I want to start with one that's like not a famous one. It's famous, but it's not like one that everyone's talked about. A little bit off the beaten track, and then we'll see if we want to, if this develops into something more. In the Olam HaYeshivas, there's legends, like in Slobodka, for example, and these are stories that are said over, Lamashal, that Reb Aaron Kotler is famous, learned in Slobodka by the Alter, and he had a sister who was a mathematician, who maybe was not so religious, was very maskilik, and he was a yasim, and she would write him letters constantly, like a mother figure of sorts, and I think in her letters she would try to encourage him to be a little more open-minded and to maybe think about broadening his horizons and leave yeshiva and etc. And at a certain point, the Alter caught on to the fact that Reb Aaron's sister was writing him letters that were not having a good effect. And the Alter appointed Rav Ruderman, who was Reb Aaron's older cousin, to intercept all letters that come from Reb Aaron's, from home, and to read through them first. And if there's something that he should see, pass them on. And if they're not something he should see, don't pass them on. And for a period of like 2 years, supposedly, Reb Aaron didn't get any letters from home because Rav Ruderman was keeping all of them. Now, Rav Ruderman himself, it's interesting, the Alter used to steal his own mail, stole Rav Ruderman's mail. Rav Ruderman had a tkufa when he was finishing Shas, which Rav Ruderman was a big Eloi, and the Alter gave Rav Ruderman like a long leash, like to do things differently, not to do things the way that everyone was doing in yeshiva. And Rav Ruderman had like a tkufa when he decided he's going to finish Shas, and the Alter felt any letter that he would get was a disturbance to him finishing Shas, and he got a letter that said, your father died, and you have to start saying Kaddish, and the Alter didn't give it to him. And supposedly he missed saying Kaddish for the Avelis of his father because he wasn't receiving the mail. When he found out, the Alter told him, "Daigenisht Eirishas is mer chashiv from Zagen Kaddish." And when Reb Aaron found out that the Alter was hijacking his mail, the Alter had Ruderman go and explain to him that this is how it's done. Now this is a legend in the Olam HaYeshivas, and really it goes back all the way to Volozhin. There's a famous story that Reb Chaim Volozhin himself used to monitor the mail of people, the Olam was learning in yeshiva. Now they were probably worried about early Haskalah or etc. And there was a guy who, the way they would do it in those days, they would get married really young, 13, 14 years old, and then sometimes they would go to yeshiva for a few years. So they would go home like once or twice a year, tops, it was good for Shalom Bayis, and they would stay in yeshiva. So the Olam, he got one of the Yungalite, Bachram Yungalite, whatever you want to call them, got a letter where he was told that his wife had a baby. Now, whoever was in charge of proofreading the letters, meaning that the Rav Chaim Volozhin didn't do it himself, he had someone who would do it. The guy was so excited to share the news, he ran into his medrash, and he says, Moshe Beryl, your wife had a baby. And he says, which wife? He says, what do you mean, which wife? You're not makbid on Rabbeinu Gershom? He says, you're not makbid on Rabbeinu Gershom? Because Rabbeinu Gershom's cherem is to not open other people's mail. And this is like a famous story from Volozhin from back in the day. So it's as a legend that existed for hundreds of years that this was going on at the Olam HaYeshivas. Now, I'm not really going to discuss the propriety of that minig or not. It's not. I didn't find anyone who openly discusses in a tshuva, the propriety of the minig HaYeshivas or etc. regarding to this particular nakuda. But we'll discuss the inyan of not opening someone's mail, the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom not opening someone's mail, and mitach hadvarim, I think we'll find some relevant nakudas or avenues where maybe it's mutter to open someone else's mail. That could be applicable to the Olam HaYeshivas. Now, I really just want to start with a little bit of hakdama about Rabbeinu Gershom. We've talked about this in the past, of the shrashim of Ashkenaz, meaning where Yadus Ashkenaz starts. And by Ashkenaz, I mean really everybody sitting in this room, almost everybody sitting in this room. Because Ashkenaz includes, I'm saying it precedes the Chassidim and the Misnagdim and all this, meaning Ashkenaz is Germany and France and etc., all the Litvish Yidden. So it precedes all the splits and everything else. Ashkenaz, where exactly it started, what the year, who the first Rosh Yeshiva is, who the first, Gadol Hadar in Ashkenaz is like a little bit lohot ba'arafel. It's a little hazy. It's not so clear. Now, some of the earliest characters who were Manda Amrim in Ashkenaz in the 900s, over 1,000 years ago, one's name was Rev Leotan. Leotan means Yehuda, like Leo, like Lutan, Leotan. Not exactly sure how they pronounce his name, but it's Rev Yehuda HaKayin. And then there was Rev Shimon HaGadol. These are two mamish hazy ancient figures in Ashkenaz. Reb Leotan, Reb Yehuda HaKayin, he was the Paisik, let's say. There's a few psakim that we have, it's interesting, random things. a handful of psakim. For example, there's a din in Yeridea and Shulchan Aruch, Reicha Milsa. That like it's about cooking two different things in the same oven, or cooking a Jewish thing in a Goyish oven. There's a psak from Rabbi Yehuda Luatan HaKoyen, like a psak about this. And there's like a handful of little psakim here or there that he has. And Rav Shimon Hagadol, he's a very famous contributor in the world of piyut. He wrote some of the most famous Ashkenazi piyutim. Lamashal, that song, Teira Hischanni Bevakasha, those words, like it's an MBD song, that's his words. I'm not like thinking straight, but there's many famous ones that he wrote. We spoke about him once in the past because there's a legend that his son, Rabbeinu Ephraim, was either kidnapped as a kid or forced to convert and became a pope later on. And the way the legend has it is many years later, Rabbeinu Shimon, who it's known was someone who was involved with the government, had to go meet the pope, and the pope was sitting with an open chessboard, mulling over a chess problem, and Rav Shimon sat down and he made a move. And the Pope said, that move I haven't seen since, I was 7 years old by my father. And he says, I'm your father. And, there was like there's a whole story. Like we spoke about it in the past once. There's a whole story like that. Whatever it is. Yiach Shiyah. These are like the earliest characters. Now after them comes Rabbeinu Gershom. Now Rabbeinu Gershom, he got his nickname Ma'ar HaGoyla from Rashi, which is a pretty good place to get a good title. Rashi gave him the title Ma'ar HaGoyla. Rashi refers to him, Asher Heir Kol HaGoyla, who lit up the whole Goyla. Rashi was, I don't want to say this in like a crass way, Rashi was a big fan of Rabbeinu Gershom. All of Rashi's Rebbeim stammed from Rabbeinu Gershom. Rashi held Rabbeinu Gershom to be like the bottleneck of all Ashkenazi Yiddishkeit. Like Rashi focused all his like haracha and his erech, like to the founder of Ashkenaz, to Rabbeinu Gershom Ma'ar HaGoyla. He gave him the title, he refers to him, he quotes him, etc. Now, Rabbeinu Gershom, it seems, was the first, let's say, call it Gadol of Ashkenaz, who was solidifying the Kehillah on its own. He was not kafuf to Bavel, he was not kafuf to asking Shailas anywhere else. He was the Paisik, he never hedged. If you look at the Chuvas of Rabbeinu Gershom, he's like Chad Mashmat, like when he has something to say, he says it straight. He says a psak, he sets policy. Rabbeinu Gershom is the one who's like, the Kehillah in Ashkenaz is coalescing around his leadership, and he's like giving it its foundation to give it like its its character. Now, Rabbeinu Gershom, to this end, made a handful of gzeros, a handful of takanas. Now, the way takanas, the teeth in a takana was a cherem. That if you violate the takana, you're in cherem. Now, did someone have to actually put you in cherem? Are you automatically in cherem? Is the cherem for life? Could you get out of the cherem? These are all shilas that are worth of discussing in Rabbeinu Gershom. Maybe we'll get to them. But Rabbeinu Gershom made these haramas to try to solidify the community and give it a certain character. Now, exactly how many haramas he made? So if you look in the Machzavitri, which is the first place that the cherem of Rabbeinu Tam is brought down, there's 10. If you look in the Kolbay, there's a little less. You look in the Tshuva from the Rami Rotenberg, which is later on, there's many, many more. To the point where I think the highest count, it ranges between 3 and 36. How many charamas Rabbeinu Tam made, Rabbeinu Gershom made. So Rabbeinu Gershom made a lot of community strengthening charamas to try to give the community its character and its strength. Now, a lot of them, like the famous ones about not marrying two women or not divorcing a woman, Bal Karchai, those, it's kind of easy to understand what Rabbeinu Gershom was dealing with. I mean, it's not so clear, and the Achronim have different terutzim to explain, different havanas to explain what the reasons for the takanas were, and etc. But they're community solidifying things. Then there are some that are very like practical takanas. For example, Rabbeinu Gershom has a takana that if you borrow a sefer from somebody and he owes you money for a different reason, you have to return the sefer first, and then you'll sort out your chayvis. Now, it just tells us that Vaistes Svarim were first of all rare and were a thing of great value. And it was like a major leverage piece. Like you could use the sefer to leverage everything on it. And Rabbeinu Gershom didn't want that. He said you have to return the sefer. There's rules about shuls. Like if you host a shul in your house and you don't like somebody, you're not allowed to kick him out. Because even though you're the host, the shul is a sarchit tzibur, for example. Like there's many of these takanas that Rabbeinu Gershom has. Now, one of the takanas that he has is a takana relating to mail. And that's the one I want to talk about. Rabbeinu Gershom, I'll read it from the way the Kolbay says it and the way the Rambam Rotenberg says it. He says as follows: Shaloi liris b'ksav shesheleach adam l'chaveroi. Not to look at a letter that someone sent his friend without yidiyasei or reshusei, without his knowledge and his permission. You're not allowed to look in somebody else's letter. That's how the Kolbay writes it. The Rami Rotenberg in this tshuva that I have open in front of me, the Rami Rotenberg writes, Cherem shalei liris b'ksav chaveroi, shesheleach l'chaveri b'lo yidiyasei aser v'mzarkei mutter. If the guy threw it out, if it's garbage, then you could look in it already. Now, we have to keep in mind that one you said here is mail was not so common, right? Mail back in those days was very uncommon. It was hand delivered, meaning if I wanted to send you mail, there was no postal service. I had to hire a runner from wherever I'm coming, write you a letter, seal it, and send it to you. So mail was very exciting. When mail came to town, everybody wanted to know what's going on. And more often than not, the mail taka contained in it something that was very personal or very private or very important. Meaning you didn't just write, You didn't just write something silly, right? You're sending mail, which is rare and expensive. It says something in it. So you have to assume that this was the way that people like actually gave over important information. And Rabbeinu Gershom, wanting to protect people's privacy, made a cherem that you're not allowed to open somebody else's mail. Now, what's interesting is that there's a whole nidin about the charamas of Rabbeinu Gershom. If they apply, did they have a cutoff date? Did they only go to the 6,000th year, meaning the beginning of the 6,000s, which means like in 1240 they ended? Or do they go really, till now? Now, what's interesting is that the Ashkenazi world, us, and this is brought down in Shulchan Aruch and Even Ezra and Siman Aleph by the Ramah, we accept that these takanas go ad infinitum. They don't have an ending point, they go. They just go. And that's why we don't marry two women, and we don't give get them balkarchai. And these are Ramahs in the end of Siman Aleph and Even Ezra, they exist. Now, the Mechaber, and it really comes from a tshuva in Avkas Reichel and a tshuva in Beis Yosef, he has two tshuvas, but the Mechaber says that these takanas have an expiration date. Rabbeinu Gershom never meant them to go forever. They have an expiration date. They've long since lapsed and expired, and they're not meshabed anybody. And that's why in the Sephardic world, till relatively recently, different countries, different times, but till relatively recently, they were able to marry multiple wives. The Baba Sali, I believe, had multiple wives. Meaning, till very recently, depending on the kehillah, depending on the kreis, they were able to marry multiple wives because they didn't shtel to this takana. They didn't hold the Rabbeinu Gershom. Now, the problem is, and the Chasam Sofer and the Tshuva and Chayshim Mishpat points this out, is that if you look in the Merami Rotenberg, Rabbeinu Tam v'Chaverov, and maybe you'll have time to read some of this, Rabbeinu Tam v'Chaverov recertified these takanas. They mentioned them again and recertified them, and they zicher didn't give an end time to it. There's no implication they give an end time. There's no one even suggests they give an end time to it. So the Chasam Sofer says, I don't understand how the Beis Yosef says these lapse and they expire. They were reinstituted later on, recertified by later dairies, and they certainly don't expire. Now, be that as it may, the Sephardic world seemed to have accepted that they have an end date, and the Ashkenazim didn't. Now, what's interesting is, therefore, in our mind, I think we associate the charamas of Rabbeinu Gershom, the takanas of Rabbeinu Gershom, to be more applicable to Ashkenazim than Sephardim. What's interesting is that this one about not opening mail seems to be the Sephardim took it much more seriously than the Ashkenazim. I don't know why, but most of the literature, most of the chuvas, let's say from the 14, 15, 1600s, like the early chuvas, even into the 1700s, are Sephardim. Ashkenazi poskim didn't write much about this cherem of not opening mail, which is maybe why in the Ilmei Yeshivas they weren't makbid. I don't know. There are definitely poskim who say that it lapsed, meaning the Welt stopped being makbid on it. Even Rosh Hashanah and Tshuva writes something like that, the Welt stopped being makbid on this. For some reason, this one's it's a role reversal. The Sephardim seem to have adopted it very strongly, and the Ashkenazim seem to have let it lapse somewhat. Now, what is what's this about to open someone else's mail? What's the takana? What's the sibas advarim? So I want to really start with a little bit of an intro to this. There's regarding to sharing somebody else's secrets. This the Chavetz Chaim in Shmiras Halashon in the end in Rechilas brings down about this, and there's a lot of makaris. I want to talk about the isser of sharing someone else's secrets, and then from there we'll segue on to maybe what the isser of uncovering someone's secrets is, which is what Rabbeinu Gershom is talking about. Now there's a very famous Gemara, Bakante Gemara in Shabbos, that I want to read from a little bit, and just frame it this way. The Gemara tells us like this. The Gemara says, it's Lamed Gimel Beis, it's a very famous Gemara. The Gemara says like this. Why was Rabbi Yehuda called Reishim Adab B'chol Makim? The Yasvi of Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Shimon were sitting together. Yasv Yehuda ben Gerim Gabayu. And Yehuda ben Gerim, Yehuda who came from Gerim, meaning Yehuda ben Gerim, and elsewhere in Shas we see him referred to with honorifics. He was definitely a good person. L'chaira was a qualified person, a Talmud Chacham, was sitting with them. Pasach of Yehuda started off and he said, Kama Noam Asayim Shalomazu. These Romans are very good. Teknu Shvakim, Teknu Gsharim, Teknu Merchatzayis. They've built up the infrastructure a tremendous amount. Rav Yossi Shasik, Rav Yossi was quiet. And then Rav Shimon ben Yochai leaned, included himself in the conversation. He says, Kol Masha Teknu, Teknu L'Tzerich Atzmam. Teknu Shvakim, L'Hisha Bazainis. Merchatzayis, L'Adam B'Matzmam. Gsharim, Litam Mechas. These Romans, they're self-centered and self-interested. Everything that they did, even if it has peripheral benefits to us, it's not for us, it's for themselves. And he gave some examples. Rav Shimon ben Yochai gave some examples. So it says, Halach Yehuda ben Gerim. Yehuda ben Gerim went, V'sipar Dvarim. He told over the thing, V'nishmu l'malchus, and it was heard to the king. Amru, and they said, Yehuda she'ila yisala. Yehuda who spoke kindly about the Romans, he should be elevated. Yosi she'sasak yigla l'tzipari, should go to Tzipari. And Shimon shegina yahareg, he should be killed. And from this stems the whole story. Shimon goes to the Ma'ara with his son of Elazar, and the Zohar Kaddish, and their whole Shimon Yochai story starts from this Gemara. Now, Taisvis, so there's some interesting details over here. Rashi says, Sipar Dvarim, he told it over. Rashi says, Yehuda ben Gerim told it over, Lit Talmidav, either to his Talmidim, Ayla Aviv, V'imai, V'la Yishmi l'malchus, V'nishma Yadei l'malchus. He didn't Chas v'Shalom go and tell over what Shimon Yochai said to the authorities. He wasn't a Meiser Yehuda ben Gerim. He told it over to his Talmidim, to his father, to his mother. he schmoozed about it. He schmoozed about something that was a secret, and Mamela, one thing led to another, and it got back. Now, because he was Yehuda ben Gerim, and he probably had connections still in the Goyish world, one thing led to another, and it got back where it wasn't supposed to go. As Isaac Rashi. Now, Taisis half an hour over here. Taisis Rabbeinu Tam, Hachigar Rabbeinu Tam, Halach Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, V'sipar Dvarim, V'nishmu l'malchus. The Rabbeinu Tam adds words to the Gemara. Says V'sipar Dvarim. He said it over, and then secondary, like a cascading effect, Nishmu l'malchus. V'yesh Dvarim shekasav ben Yehuda. Ve'ein ner l'Rabbeinu Tam. Daminu parad. Taisis is fine. Now, what's interesting is that the Gemara at the end of here brings that after Shimon Yochai comes out of the Ma'ira, so it says a few stories. He comes out more than once. This is famous stuff. The Gemara ends off. He says as follows. It says. Nafak l'shuka. It's mamish the end of the Gemara, the tail end of this whole episode in Lamed Aleph and Aleph. It says Nafak l'shuka. He went out to the street. Chazi Yehuda ben Gerim. He saw Yehuda ben Gerim was there. Amar, he said, Adayin yesh lezeh ba'olam. This guy's still around. Nasim ba'yenev asa begal shalat vaso gal shalat samas. He looked at him and he turned him into a pile of bones, which implies strongly that Rav Shimon Yochai very much faulted Yehuda ben Gerim for telling over this piece of news, for telling over this conversation that happened in private. Now, Tosfos takes out the Nasa Gal Shal Atzamas, which Tosfos feels is disparaging, and Tosfos says no, he just Nasam Bayenev and he died, which means that Tosfos is sticking with what his story is, that Yehuda ben Gerim was not a bad guy, he was a good guy. He just was a little carefree with information that should have been more secretive, and because of that, it led to bad outcomes. But he wasn't really held, mamash at fault for this. The Rambam in Hilchos Lashon Hara, in Hilchos Days in Perek Zayin, the Rambam says like this: Echad ha'mesaper b'Lashon Hara b'fnei chaverei, oy shalei b'fanav, and v'hamesaper dvarim shegarmin im nishmu ishmi piyish lahazik chaverei b'gufim. You say over something that if they're heard by enough people and it gets to the right place, it could cause damage. V'afilu lahatzar loy lahatzaloi lafchidei harei ze Lashon Hara. That's considered Lashon Hara. Now the Noisei Kelim, the Kesef Mishnah, and Nagos Maimoni bring, where does the Rambam know that saying over something that even though it's innocuous information, but if it goes enough to the right people, it's called Lashon Hara? The Makaros from this Gemara and Shabbos, that you see that Yehuda ben Gerim was held to account. He was considered the villain of the story for saying over something. He just wasn't cautious with the secret. He didn't mean to say anything bad. He didn't mean to do anything bad. He wasn't trying to get Shimon Yochai in trouble. He just wasn't cautious with the secret. He was like, secret was easy by him. And that got him in trouble. Now the Rambam learns from this a major din, and the Magen Avram and Archaim and Sim Kufn and Vav paskins like this, that to say over something personal from one person to another is already a form of Lashon Hara, because revealing a secret, you never know where the secret goes, you never know what sort of Pa'il Yotze, what sort of cascading negative effects it could have. Now, Lamaisa, there's a Gemara in Yuma, and after Alam Rebbeis, that says, L'cher even more explicitly, the Gemara says like this, it says, Vayikra al Moshe v'yidaber, Lama hiktim kriya l'diber, lim deter derech eretz, fine, that's one thing. Then the Gemara says as follows: Amar of Musya bar Breder of Masi Mishmeder of Musya, Rabba minayin la'omer davar l'chaveri shu bal yomer at sheyom le'lechamar. How do you know that if someone tells something over to his friend, the person who heard the information is bebal yomer? He's like under a what do you call it? Like a NDA, like a non-reveal. Automatically, until he tells you explicitly that you could reveal it. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to go be mefarsim what he's saying. So the Gemara in Yuma seems to say pretty clearly that when someone tells you over something, and it doesn't sound like it's anything that has to be super sensitive about them, one person tells another person something that's private, something that's unique to them, you're not allowed to say that over. You're not allowed to reveal the secret unless you get explicit permission to reveal it over. Ad Kedei Kach, the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us a story. It says as follows. It says, Hahu Talmuda, there was this Talmida, the Nafik Alei Kala, the Gali Milsa, Deter Be Midrasha Basar Esrim V'Tartin Shnin. There was a Talmud that there was a rumor about him, or that it became known about him, that he told over some information, some sort of secret, Beis Medrash information they had. It didn't Torah, they passed in one way, the other way, which Dayan said what, some sort of secret from the Beis Medrash. He said it over after 24 years. Afke Rav Ami Be Midrasha Amar Dein Gal Yeraza. Rav Ami threw him out of Beis Medrash and said, this is the secret giver over. We can't have a guy who leaks. This is the leaker. And he threw him out of his medrash. So from this, the Rabbeinu Yonin, Shari Tshuva, and the Smag in the mitzvahs says that telling over a secret, Megala Soid, is a form of Lashon Hara. If a person has a secret and you share it, not unauthorized, you share it without getting permission to share it, that's a form of Lashon Hara. And the Chavetz Chaim, in Hilchos Yisuri Rechilus in Klal Ches, he says as follows: V'chayev kol adam lahastir asoid sheyigal lechaver derech seiser. You're mechuyev to keep a secret that your friend revealed to you. Af b'she'ein begilei asoidahu in rechilus. Even though there's nothing inherently rechilistic about saying over the secret, you're mechuyev to keep the secret secret. Ki yesh begilei asoid nezek lebailov v'sibur lahafar machshavasai. When you tell over secrets that a person has, it could cause damage and it could allow his plans to unravel. It could just make problems for him. Fine. This is written. Then the Chavetz Chaim, Afnar, and the Ber Chaim quotes that the Makar is from Rabbeinu Yonah, which is quoting a Gemara in Sanhedrin and a Gemara in Yuma and the Gemara in Shabbos, etc. So Chazal, as paskin by the Rishonim, the Smag and Rabbeinu Yonah, as codified in the Chavetz Chaim in Hilchos Lashon Hara, is that telling a secret over about someone is a problem. Now, of course, there's many ton of gray area over here, meaning what type of secrets, and let's say a guy didn't say it's a secret, or he said it over in front of multiple people, or it's an old secret or a new secret, or you recorded something surreptitiously, or someone said a shtickle Torah over in front of something. Like there's many shalas, and I don't really want to get stuck into the Hilchas secrets, but there's a lot of secrets. Keeping information secret, what type of secrets are you mechuyev to share? There's a Gemara in Yuma about people who didn't tell over secrets. Bram, Shem Rishon Yerkov, the Gemara in Lamed Ches. There's a lot to talk about in regarding to secrets. But now I want to segue over to Rabbeinu Gershom. So Rabbeinu Gershom has this Cherem that we read from the Kolbai and from the Rami Rotenberg, not to open somebody else's mail. Now the Poskim, like we said, the Svardish Poskim who discuss it, struggle to figure out exactly what the rationale, what the reason for Rabbeinu Gershom's Cherem is. So in the Shalos Shuvas Teres Chaim and Chelik Gimel and Sim Mem Zayin, he has a tshuva over here. He says, "Nidrashti lasher shaluni al Reuven shayishalech ksav chasam im charamas alav lazar li'ir acheres." Reuven sent a letter, a closed letter with charamas not to open it. Ubigia haratz loiseir ba levi v'nat laksav im aksav macherim upascha v'kavash aksav le'nasan li'ad mishnishach ilav shalom menem adinoi. Levi, who I guess is the mail collector of the town, took in all the mail, saw that this letter had something important. He opened it up and he kept it. Obviously, with some business secret or some information that was beneficial, Levi squashed this thing. And the question is, what should the einish for Levi be? What's the punishment for Levi? Meaning, do I look at this like, is Levi meaning? Let's game out the case. Reuven sent a letter to Shimon. Reuven sent some secret business information. I have stock in X, Y, and Z, and if you buy it on time, it'll greatly benefit. You'll be able to make a lot of money. Shimon receives the mail in the post house of the village, and Shimon said, Levi receives the mail, and he says, I'm not giving this to Shimon. I'm going to keep this for myself. I'll take this information. So now Shimon doesn't get the information that was sent him, and Levi benefits from it. So the Shaila Teres Chaim wants to know, is this like a din of mazik? Is this garmi? Is this like how do you rate this? How do you rate this isser? And the Teres Chaim goes through some of the various stadim over here. He says, L'zayim Rebiktsar, he says, the Vadei Royal Liaser Levi. He says, first of all, from a communal standpoint, Levi deserves to be punished. This is a cherem kadmon, and Levi deserves to be punished right away for intercepting the mail. You're not allowed to open somebody else's mail, you're not allowed to look. And this is interesting, there's many versions of this, but he says, I doubt anybody does this today. You write on the outside of the letter, Ulazar Nachash de Ragma, which means Ulazar, someone who this mail is not addressed to. Nachash means the Cherem. The Ragma is the Rabbeinu Gershom Ar Hagoyla. Meaning, you write in it like, that's like the stamp that says, do not open. Is if you, there's others that write, Pagin the Ragma. Peiritz Geder Yishchanu Nachash, Cherem the Rabbeinu Gershom. Meaning, there's many different versions of the stamp, do not open, that you write on a letter. But he says, first of all, you know that this is not appropriate because Rabbeinu Gershom made a Cherem on this. And it says on the letter, we write in the letter, you're not allowed to do this. Then he goes off to handle if it's Garmi, if it's not Garmi, etc. Tzum Seif, what he ends up saying is, and he brings these Rishonim that we just quoted, that it's a form of Lashon Hara, and he says just like it's usher to reveal somebody's secret, it's also usher to include yourself in somebody's secret. Meaning if Reuven and Shimon are having a conversation, and you figure out a way how to listen in and include yourself and steal their secret, that's no different than telling over a secret that somebody told you. Mali, if you tell it over to someone else, you tell it over to yourself. That's what Teres Chaim says. Either way, you're including yourself, just like including somebody else in a third-party secret is not acceptable, including yourself in a third-party secret is also not acceptable. Maliata. You're including yourself. That's the same problem. Now, the Halachas Ketanis from Rabbi Yaakov el-Gazi, he has a few different chuvas about this, and in there he says other reasons. He also calls it Lashon Hara in one of the chuvas. He has a few different shilas that he discusses the different variables about opening someone's letter. Now, in any case, I want to talk about maybe some of the exceptions to this. So the first exception that we discussed right away is how long does the cherem have a lapse date? Meaning, does the cherem go into this effect? And we mentioned that the Sfardim traditionally seem to hold that Rabbeinu Gershom's charamas do have a lapse date. Ashkenazim seemingly don't, as certified by this tshuva in the Rami Rotenberg that shows that Rabbeinu Tam and the Rashbam and other Gedolei Rishonim, Samchu Yedeim, and they kept this takanas. But perhaps this particular takana became like Xer that the Tzibur was not so Tzugishtal to. And there is some indication like that in Chuvas that happened. And the reason would be that when letters became commonplace and letters started including all sorts of mundane information, and letters were not so important, and that wasn't the main way to communicate information. So then, it like fell into this use. Is there sometimes a letter that includes something very secretive that you don't want anyone to see? Yeah, sure there is. But here, most letters are just, mundane information. They're not wichtig. Maybe fell into this use. That could be. That's one tzad. Another tzad, maybe another exception potentially, is close family. Now this is an interesting one. Close family. Is a husband allowed to open his wife's mail? Is a wife allowed to open her husband's mail? Could a father open his children's mail? Could children open their father's mail? Meaning there's what about close family? So there's an interesting thing. There's a tshuva. Here, one second. There's a tshuva that says like this. There's a tshuva that actually there's a tshuva that says as follows. In the ksuba, in the shtar tanaim, not the ksuba, in the shtar tanaim, we write, V'lei avrichu v'ayalimu loizum mizu v'loizum mizeh. Now, givenlich, that means financially. They're not going to hide their money from each other. It means no foreign LLCs, no tricks. You know what I'm saying? You don't hide the money from each other. But there are some places that say that included in the V'lei avrichu v'ayalimu loizum mizu v'loizum mizeh is no secrets. If I get a letter, you're allowed to open it. You get a letter, I'm allowed to open it. I could read your texts. You could look at my emails. This is maybe there are some places that hold that this is mamish mitnai ksuba, like mitnai ishus, that a husband and the contract that a husband and wife make with each other includes this. Now it's not the pashtus, but there are those that say that. I think they bring a raya from Marik that learns the words like that's part of the tnai b'nish leishtoi. There's similarities. The tzedakah shaylas. Now, this interesting is that there's a story that's said over about the Chassam Sofer's wife Sarul. I think her name was Sarul. The Chassam Sofer, we presume, must have received a lot of mail every day, right? I imagine he got a lot of chuvas, but and I don't think his wife generally opened his mail, but there was a letter that came and she opened the mail. She opened to look at it, and then ended up being something that had nothing to do with her. And she brought it to the Chassam Sofer. And the Chassam Sofer told her, metarnish, you can't open someone else's mail. He says, befrat, you have to understand, in my position as a Rav, there are people who tell me their secrets, and they only want me to know their secrets. They're not okay with you knowing their secrets. You can't just open their mail. And she told him that, the story's brought down in English. She said, I thought it was a letter from my father, Kveger, and I was so excited to see what it said in it that I wanted to open it up. And so I said, oh, okay, fine. That was, but in general, no opening mail. Now, so I saw different people handling if you could bring rayas one way or the other from this. Meaning, is there an implication over here that like a regular mundane couple whose mail is just, mundane things, would this story imply that really the normal presumption is that a wife could open her husband's mail? And the Chassam Sofer was like saying a chiddush that no, in my line of business, I get secrets and you can't open my mail. From her answer that she said she thought it was her father, does that mean that familial things I am with? Like I saw people trying to buy different tires from the story. I don't know what to make of it. It's just, to me, it's just an interesting story. Now, another common shayla, and this our Chashochan talks about, is it's not so negay anymore, but what about postcards? A postcard, you didn't really make a very good attempt to conceal what you're sending, right? Meaning you wrote on the back of a postcard, you sent it in the mail. Now, imagine you're a person in an apartment building who's sorting through the mail, whatever, that's a whole pile of mail that's there, and you see some postcards from some exotic location. You didn't really try to hide it. I'm saying it's a postcard. He just turns it over and he's like, oh, okay, you went to St. Moritz, very nice. Do you have to really make an attempt? Let's say you don't write in it. Now, there are some places that say that when people stopped writing, Pagan the Ragma or whatever it is, these type of do not open, that implies a certain that we're not so makbid on this. The mail doesn't contain such interesting things anymore, and we're not so makbid. And that could be something that the Reshivas were being semach on as well. So some say that, and some say the Aruch HaShulchan writes, for example, that people who write on postcards, hey, yes, you showed that you don't have any major intent to cover up what you're doing. It's it doesn't have an issur anymore. Now, so I don't know. It's just a sampling of the different things that the place can say. You can paint your own picture. It's not hard to imagine a circumstance where the Rosh Hashivas felt justified, meaning Sai being it because of the Chavis HaChinuch, like a father opening his child, or someone committing themselves like a marriage where by joining this institution you commit yourself that you're under someone else's auspices, and they're going to engage themselves in your life in a way that is somewhat invasive. That's what happens in yeshiva. It's not, I'm saying that's a normal thing. Or being the fact that mail became not so private and there's not such a presumption of privacy anymore, or being that mail often came on postcards. Back in the day, that was much cheaper to send a postcard. You just sent the postcard. There's much makom to mekel, but this is one of the haramas of Rabbeinu Tam, where the Ramah in Yeridei and Shem Lamed and Chas Cherem writes that if a person violates it, the Ramah writes 2 days. Either he's automatically in Cherem, or anybody who wants could come put him in Cherem. Now, we don't do that anymore, and we don't. That's not how it goes anymore. But there's a presumption of severity if the Ramah writes something like that. And although some poskim say this isser lapsed, many poskim hold it didn't lapse. And l'chayr it applies to someone who leaves their phone on the table and they get a text. Meaning, more than likely, Rabbeinu Gershom's Cherem still applies. You can't just look over at someone else's phone. Meaning, there's many common applications, and I think over there by someone's phone, most people do have a presumption of privacy. It's usually password protected, and they don't expect you to, There's definitely circumstances where Rabbeinu Gershom's Cherem seems to be very much still in effect. In any case, to be continued. Possibly about more Rabbeinu Gershom, possibly not. We'll see.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.